Welcome, everyone, and happy Flag Day. My name is Paul Golin. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism and our social justice initiative, Jews for a Secular Democracy. And I'm honored to be joined by our guest, Kate Cohen. Kate Cohen is a Washington Post contributing columnist and author of 3 books, including the forthcoming We of Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too, which I was lucky enough to get to read an advanced copy of, and I highly recommend it. It's insightful, it's funny, and it touches on many issues that folks here care deeply about, and we'll talk about a whole lot of those issues tonight. As far as structure, I have some questions to start the conversation, but we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So please write your questions in the chat as they come up, and my colleagues will alert us to it when we get to it. And I also wanted to open with some context for why we wanted to have this conversation. So as mentioned, I wear 2 hats. Society for Humanistic Judaism represents secular and humanistic Jews. Many of us are comfortable using the A word, atheist. I describe myself as an atheist, but not all of us do, and we will talk about that word certainly. And Jews for Secular Democracy is a pluralistic initiative. It addresses church-state separation and pushes back against religious fundamentalism through both secular and religious Jewish perspectives, because we feel strongly that Jews across the spectrum need to work together on this issue. But part of why SHJ launched Jews for Secular Democracy is because we know what it's like to be marginalized twice, both as an ethno-religious minority by being Jewish, and also as non-religious people in what is still an overwhelmingly religious country in America. So if you're joining us and bringing with you a religious perspective, we appreciate you hearing and trying to understand our perspective. And of course, if you're Jewish, regardless of belief, you are at most only 1 degree separated from an atheist Jew, because rates of atheism and secularity among Jews are more than double the rate of among Americans in general. So while it's pretty common for Jews to know atheist Jews, it's very rare to have our position so beautifully articulated in a national platform like the Washington Post. And it's been so affirming for me personally to read your columns, Kate. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. I write my little columns in my little farmhouse, and then every once in a while I get to go out in the world and realize that they do mean something to people, and people are grateful to have a secular voice in a legacy medium. So I feel honored and excited. And also, you're one of the first people to read my new book. So
Two thumbs
thank
up.
goodness you liked it, because this would have been an awkward start.
Well, no, and I think for the folks certainly who are joining us through the Society for Humanistic Judaism, this is something that not only will we encourage folks to read, but I think can be discussion groups. I think some of our communities are probably going to want to bring you in perhaps to talk about it, and also they are going to try to convert you to humanistic Judaism. Just be prepared. I kind of want to also, but we'll get to that. Let's start with how in your column and in this new book, you write about how religion is default in the US and how you see that as backwards. So can you kind of explain that further, what you mean by that and what your experiences have been?
I think it was in February, I was sitting down to write a piece about a bill that failed in New York State. I'm in New York State. I didn't write down where I was from. I live in Albany, New York. And there was a bill that the governor vetoed, actually, Democratic governor vetoed, that would have made it a requirement that anyone who was sentenced or as part of their sentencing was required to have substance abuse treatment, it made it a requirement for them to be informed that they could have secular treatment and not just faith-based treatment, which most programs are. AA is a faith-based substance abuse program. So she vetoed this bill, and I started to write about it. And, it occurred to me how often I have experienced, and my kids have experienced, and all of us, I think, have experienced the gratitude for being able to opt out of religious prayer or religious sort of essentials of American life. We're allowed to do that. But I just kind of felt fed up. Like, why should I opt out? Why should it be on, the responsibility of my parents when I was a child to write a letter saying, no, I would not be participating in Bible study, which was a feature of my public school in Virginia, where I was growing up. Everybody once a week left school grounds so that it would be constitutional. And I was left alone in the classroom because I had gotten permission to be there and be alone, which was great. Not every country affords that kind of freedom. My children also did not have to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. If they didn't want to, they could, by law, they couldn't be punished for that. But again, we're supposed to live in a secular democracy. And I ended up feeling like this was backward, that the default should be secular. And then if you want to swear on a Bible, if you want to, say a prayer, if you want, whatever you want to do, it should be a choice that you're making, that you should have to opt in for that. And that was the basis of that particular piece, but it is also a part of the book. And sort of a mission of the book is to suggest to people, remind people that we might need to sort of flip our way of looking at things and to sort of try to return to this idea that we are a secular nation. So that's where the upside down column came from, and it is how I feel.
And so I'm in New York too, but we have a group for Jews for Secular Democracy that was working on that secular recovery bill, and it passed both both sides of our state government, and it was a shock and a surprise. And the reason she gave for vetoing it was that it would be too much of a burden for judges to have to explain your rights, And again, it wasn't like we were saying there should be no religious recovery program. Exactly. It's just let people know that it doesn't have to be a religious recovery program. Right.
Let people know is all we were asking for. But really what it should be is, if you prefer a religious one, you should choose that. You should get to choose that. There should be a system to allow you to choose that. And it's the other way around.
Right. And on some of these battles, we've just lost it. Like invocations in the State House, right, have been deemed constitutional, and what we're now trying to battle for, which is almost like trying to beg for crumbs, is will you include a Jewish one? Or we're going to do 300 Christian ones in a row. Like, can you include us? Let alone a humanistic one. We have had some humanistic ones as well. So, and you do talk about how important it is for you to be out as an atheist. So how do you define atheist, and why is it important for you to use the word to define yourself?
I define atheist as someone who does not believe there's a supernatural being who created or directs the universe. That is how I define it, and I do that rather than saying I don't believe. I do say sometimes I don't believe in God, but But that gets trickier because I think people can get quite squishy about what God is. And people have sort of interpreted the concept to mean, universal connectedness or love, wonderful things, but I think that's a separate thing. So I don't, I stay away from it for that reason. And for another reason, which comes up a few times in the book, I do think that God exists. Don't quote me out of context here. I think God is an incredible human creation. So as somebody who really is fascinated with and respects human creativity and art, the problem of mortality and how we face that as people who are aware that we're going to die, God and the afterlife were brilliant inventions and continue to hold, obviously, a ton of power. So I tend to talk about God as something that is created rather than something that's, silly or doesn't exist or no, but we made it. So supernatural being, I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And why it's important. Okay, well, this gets back to the first question, right? If sort of religion were not the default in this country, I wouldn't have to sort of stipulate, I think. In a non-backwards world, in a forwards world, not believing that a supernatural being that you can't see or prove, that would be the default. Mm. And then you'd have to sort of define who you were on top of that. But that's not the world we live in. And so for that kind of basic reason, and then for political reasons, I think it's important to say whenever I can that I don't believe that there's a supernatural being in charge. So there you go.
You touched on a bit of the liberal Jewish approach to God. Mm-hmm. As metaphor or, extending it far beyond what is written about God in the original source material, right? And so, Rabbi Harold Kushner just recently died, but he wrote the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And I admit to only reading the first half before I got it and knew I disagreed, but it was basically, God is where the good is, and God is not the part that's bad. God is on your side. God is not causing the cancer or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I really struggle with it because I don't believe that, and I want to be out and share my beliefs. But I also, and you say the very beginning of the book, I'm not interested in vanquishing religion or in convincing believers not to believe. Yeah. And you do talk a bit about, the comfort that people can derive from their faith. And at times I'm frankly jealous of having that when I don't. And I don't want to take it away from people, including my wife to some degree, who I think believe in some kind of vague notion of reincarnation. She's from Japan, so she doesn't have the Christian notion of heaven and hell, but I think she's got, and when we lost my dog and she said, I believe I'll see him again. I'm not going to be the jerk who says,
well, no, actually,
yeah, right? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
But I do feel, first of all, that our views aren't represented, and more importantly, that again, it's a default, and I can't be represented in those conversations. So, and I had very much relational experience when you talked about growing up. You grew up in a Reform Jewish community. Mm-hmm. You had a bat mitzvah. You found great warmth in the synagogue community, but you point out that nobody ever discussed belief in God, one way or the other, right? It was just this presumption. And I was in conservative Judaism, but it was the same for me. I think I felt more alienated than you described because I needed to talk about it, and there was no one who was going to talk about it with me. What do you want our liberal religious friends to know about atheists? Why do we need to have this discussion about belief? And then especially on the political side of it, we're in complete alignment with liberal religious people on issues like LGBTQ equality and abortion access. We're going to vote the same. Why do we need to have this conversation about belief?
Well, I wouldn't say that I feel like we need to have a conversation in the sense of I need to convince anyone of anything or they need to convince me of anything. What I am hoping for is for people to have these conversations in their own homes, inside themselves, if possible, beyond their homes. It's true. No one ever talked about it when I was in synagogue, when I was a kid growing up. I assumed that my parents thought about God the same way I did, which was sort of as this incredible literary character. My father's an English professor. It just kind of, it just sort of made sense. But existing in that in between world is this metaphor, is this truth. I don't think we need to exist there. I think we can say straight up, we're using these as metaphorical terms, or this is an actual being. We're actually giving praise, which really is most of what every Jewish service is. We're actually giving praise to an actual creature who can actually hear us versus a sort of a metaphorical sense of, you put in one category everything that's good, okay, we'll call that God, and everything that's bad, okay, we'll call it something else. Maybe in a world where no one believed in an actual God who cared who people had sex with and what kind of clothes women wore and things like that. Maybe in that world, fine, leave it, nebulous or something. But in this world, in this country, if you use the word God, to some people, it really means someone who's making rules that, we might disagree with. So that's where I think, we have a responsibility, especially in this country, especially now, to make it clear. I am fascinated with the use of the word God to mean kind of anything good. But I think that kind of comes from, a desire to sort of hang on to tradition, which I understand. And also a desire, a real sense that believing in God is somehow the right thing, the moral thing. So the way we do that, if we no longer really believe those stories in the Old Testament, is we just redefine God. And then we can stay in the community, the sort of larger community of people who believe. So I think I, as you know, don't think you have to believe in God to be moral. And I think all of that stuff needs to be reevaluated.
Well, so that is something I wanted to also ask about, which is the most common smear against atheists is, well, if you don't believe in some higher being that's, I guess, going to punish you or watch over your actions, what's your moral compass? Why be good if there's no punishment? Or basically, how can you be a moral person if you don't believe in that higher power, which I'll put to you because I know you've also touched on this in the book.
Yeah, I had fun with this one. So what I did in the book was I started by arguing that nobody gets their morality from religion. Even religious people don't get their morality from religion. And the way I did that is pretty easy, really. All you have to do is point out that kind of every person that you know every religious person that you know, and even religions themselves, pick and choose from their traditions and their holy books the things that they're going to emphasize, the things that they're going to ignore completely, you know, the things they say, oh, this is what Christianity really is, or this is what Judaism really believes, and then they just leave those stuff aside. So that's fine. I wouldn't want to be friends with anyone who didn't, who wasn't making those decisions. I'm not throwing shade in that way. I just mean to say, if you're picking and choosing from your religious tradition, then how are you picking and choosing? What are you using to pick and choose? And I believe it is an innate, or at least separate from religion, a moral compass that we all, most of us, have. So it doesn't come from religion, because if it came from religion, then you wouldn't be able to then there wouldn't be millions of Catholics ignoring the injunction not to use, you know, contraception. And there wouldn't be some Jews who, you know, believed that homosexuality is a sin, you know, and some who don't. I mean, the only way is because we're all using our moral compass. And then I would just say that atheists do too. So that's kind of how I come at it in the book. Where we get it from, I mean, that's another book, I guess. I think it's fascinating, but I guess I feel like on some basic level, it starts with empathy. You know, in my book, I call it my rule of how would you feel? But obviously other people have other names for it, but it just sort of starts with empathy and trying to understand, you know, how things affect you and how they might affect other people in the same position. And then you sort of extrapolate from there. It's more complicated than that because life is more complicated. But I think that's the basic gist that everybody sort of has as their golden rule.
Right. I mean, the golden rule, it's in every human culture in
Right.
one way or another. It's and empathy is in every culture. And I think those are all, I think the source is within us, but it seems like when you present that or share where your values come from, whether you're calling yourself an atheist or, you know, for us, certainly in our movement, humanism is the word we use to describe our values and where they come from.
Right.
And atheist, you know, your definition is how I do it as well, which is I say that I don't believe in God or God of the Bible or any man-made God. But it seems to not just be taken as, okay, that's what you believe, but also as an attack maybe on what other people believe inherently. And is that reaction just happening on their end, or has that been fostered maybe by some angry atheists, or, you know, how do you see that?
You're not going to get me to blame other people for that.
Okay, all right, I tried.
I mean, I think it's sort of inherent in the rejection of a kind of not just worldview, but kind of world construct that so many people share. It's sort of inherent in rejecting that you're kind of implying that, you know, the people who are still inside that worldview aren't seeing clearly, or that they are not bright enough to, I mean, I can't believe anybody ever named atheist brights. It's whatever.
Right.
But I mean, so yeah, so okay, there I just threw shade. But yeah, I think any kind of sort of strongly held intellectual belief that opposes what the majority is challenging to people. I mean, challenges, especially if their belief wasn't something that they sort of adopted as a grown-up, but is something that they sort of grew up with and potentially never questioned or aren't used to questioning. I think there is a sense that, yes, that we have to overcome where they think that we think that they aren't thinking. And I don't feel that way. I strive to understand the people in my life who are believers, and I, like you, sometimes feel envious. But it's more like there's no way I can't turn something that in my head is a fiction into reality.
What's so remarkable to me, and I felt, I've been a Jewish communal professional for 25 years, and before starting at FHJ, almost 7 years now, I worked in pluralistic setting where there is very much a religious privilege, right? Though, at least I should say a religious expectation that if you are here,
Right.
you believe, right? And again, as you and I both grew up with, there was no actual confirmation or discussion about it. It was just the presumption. And so the blessing mentioned God, the songs, just the whole ethos, with the understanding that people are going to opt out. And this tight-knit group is okay with that if people aren't going to fit or whatever. What's remarkable to me is, Jews, I feel, have suffered terribly in history because our mere existence kind of pointed out that Christianity was not something we believed, right? And so we're like just as Jews, as even if we were believing Jews, we're like, our existence suggests that maybe they don't have it 100% right. Of course, Protestantism too, there were a dozen different religions within that one religion, right? But okay. And so for me to feel marginalized within Judaism also, it's like, do you not understand the experience of representing a different belief and then kind of getting beaten down because you're pointing it out? So it's just frustrating for me, but I do feel like there is a dividing line at a certain point, and that it may just at times be too hard to overcome when it is about, is there or isn't there, the thing that we're either praying to or not. It's challenging. So
Yeah, it is a big sort of distinction between people that we sort of try and smooth out, like I said, by redefining what God is, and then on the other hand, there's a lot more that sort of connects me and, most American Jews, my politics and my values, and, so it's a big distinction in some ways. And I think some people would find it, personally destabilizing to think about. But on the other hand, I have to say that in the 21st century, everybody knows that that there are different religions. You're not introducing, and that there are people who don't believe. You're not introducing a completely new concept. You're not saying, there's no Santa Claus to a child who's never heard that before. You're
Right.
saying it to people who've heard it before, and they just don't want to hear it from you.
Yeah. And the kind of closeting that is required sometimes to be in those communities,
Right.
when, as you say, Jews may feel a warmth to community, and they may feel that they want to be involved politically, or there's like a dozen reasons why someone may join a synagogue that has nothing to do with liturgy. And so a couple of years ago, actually, there was a series in the Jewish newspaper, The Forward, asking 19 thought leaders. I think it was 18 out of 19 were rabbis, but one wasn't. So it's 19 thought leaders about God. They didn't interview any atheist Jews, unfortunately, but they did ask. One of the interviews was with Rabbi David Wolpe, who's fairly well known out in LA, and he said, "I don't talk about God because it's divisive. This is a congregational rabbi, and God is the fourth or fifth word of every sentence in the liturgy. But he doesn't talk about God because it's divisive, and it will push away the Jews who are here because they support Israel, or who are here because they want to do the learning, and so on." And I was just thinking, the very next question after that answer, he was asked, "But can you have Judaism without God?" And he said, "No, because that's the reason why we're getting together." So I was just thinking, there's definitely an atheist in his community, if not on his board, who can't even tell this rabbi who they love what they really believe, because he's established that you have to believe in God, that Jews need God to do what. So that was really upsetting to me, and I really hear your message and have been trying to work on this idea of we need to be able to speak about our beliefs because they're true and they're authentic, and there are people in the closet. And you did touch on the analogy of LGBTQ, and of course, we're not in the same danger in the US. You do point out the dangers of being an atheist in lots of other places around the world. But I just want to touch on that analogy because I've felt it in my own life, and I think a lot of people have, about when you can and can't talk about what you actually believe. And you, in your own journey, you describe how you moved from, you'd identify three options as you moved out of accommodating the religious default. You talk about you can participate in religion outwardly but not inwardly, or you can participate but with caveats, which I think is what we do at Humanistic Judaism, or you can move to just say no. Can you kind of walk us through those pieces of your journey?
Yeah, I didn't really I knew I had made a shift in my life, and I didn't really map it in that way until I wrote this book. Basically, anybody is born into a religious tradition, and is raised in a religious tradition has some choices to make. And so you're faced with a ceremony, you're faced with some expectation that your religious faith has placed on you. And if you don't believe, then you have three options. And so I take some time to go through those options. And the first option is just doing exactly what is expected of you. And then in your head saying whatever you want to say to yourself, or disagreeing in whatever way you want. And this option, the philosopher Kwame Appiah calls it orthopraxy instead of orthodoxy, right? So correct behavior versus correct belief. So you don't have correct belief, but at least you have correct behavior. That's option one. And that is what I did for my bat mitzvah. I was just the perfect little bat mitzvah with my, with my talis and my prayers. I wanted to learn all the prayers. I chanted my my portion. I gave a great speech. And then the next option two, is to participate, but kind of put your own spin on it, do it your own way, reinterpret. And yes, I agree. That's what a lot of people do. That I've been to so many, weddings where people write their own vows. We did that at our wedding. That's the option we chose. When we got married, we rewrote the 7 blessings. We wrote our own vows. We really sort of excised God as much as we could, but take a step back, squint, Jewish wedding all the way. Option 3 is just don't do it. Is just say no to it. And I came to feel that at on some level, for me, that was the most honest option, the option that really kind of accorded with the way that I wanted to live my life. And this all came to a head as there's a very dramatic chapter about my son and not having being bar mitzvah, which required me to stand up to my father-in-law after many, many years of not standing up to my father-in-law. So yeah, those are the 3 options. And I just want to make clear, and I think I even say this in the chapter, Option two could be the most honest, most authentic choice for you. You know, if you want to both agree and disagree, if you're not sure, if you think on some level that Jewish tradition or Christian tradition or should continue, that you want to be a part of that, while at the same time you want to express your beliefs. I don't want to say that this is the end point of the journey for everyone, but I think it's the option three is the end point for everyone. Just saying no. I do think it is an underused option. I do think it's an option that people are afraid to use, and for whatever reason, family reasons or societal pressure. And I guess I just would encourage people to do that if they can, and if it feels right. I mean, I think what we're all trying to do, what very religious people are trying to do, what I am trying to do, is live as sort of meaning rich life as I can, and as sort of, yeah, where everything I do is thought through and felt. And so for me, for me, that meant getting to the point where I could say no to religious traditions that I just didn't have meaning for me.
To me, that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the work that I do. The political work is one thing, but then the humanistic Judaism piece, to me, it's only about meaning, really. And community is meaningful, or don't be in that community, right? If it's not doing something for you, or if it's not helping you do something for others, then don't do it. And so that certainly, that third option is one that I took personally. For more than 2 decades, I didn't go to high holiday services. Mm-hmm. And then when I started to engage with humanistic Judaism, first of all, it would have been poor form to have this job and not go to the local humanistic Judaism high holidays. But even when I did, the relief, the weight lifted in reading words that I agreed with, right, was meaningful, right? And so now I go willingly, and it's lovely. And that first one I went to when it was Yom Kippur, and the rabbi said, while we know that some of us may be fasting as a cultural expression of our Judaism, where the rest of us were meeting after the services for lunch on Yom Kippur at this restaurant down the block. And I'm like, okay, this is my rabbi. So, that part of the book is really where I want our movement to dig in, because you are our target audience. And the middle part so you rewrote the 7 brachot, which are a standard part of a Jewish wedding. Mm-hmm. I got married in a Reform synagogue. I remember the rabbi, the cantor, was world class. This is Temple Emmanuel in New York City. Some of you may know that they broadcast on the radio their Shabbat services because it's like an opera. And the rabbi said, usually we do 3 of the 7 blessings. And I was like, have the cantor do all 7. It's beautiful, right? And you talk about in your book, when it's in Hebrew, you don't hear the theology, right? She wasn't doing it in English. She was doing it in Hebrew. It was beautiful. But to be able to do that and believe it, like that is meaningful for the folks who engage in humanistic Judaism. But I have heard that humanistic Judaism is too Jewish for folks who are looking for that third option, which is I'm out. Mm-hmm. And so of course we're kind of in the middle, because lots of Jews see what we do and say, that's not Judaism, right? That's not Jewish enough. Right. But for the folks that I think we are trying to reach, we're too Jewish. And so one thing you do talk about also in your book is additional ways to find what you called like another home, right? How like secular alternatives to the parts of organized religion that atheists might miss, a comfortable physical space like a synagogue. So can you talk a bit about what those alternatives might be and where people might find them?
Sure. Well, I love churches. That's one thing. I love sacred buildings. I love sacred architecture. And I try to understand what the appeal is for me in the chapter that I wrote about it in the book. And I really feel like there's this dual power of another home, a second home, which is just such a luxury to have another place where you feel like you belong outside of your own place. I mean, having one place is a luxury. Having a second place feels like your world expands. So that is there's this sort of the home part of it, and then there's sort of the temple part, the way that a beautiful space can make you feel, larger than yourself, can make you feel like you're part of something, can make you feel ennobled. So I kind of, take a little tour of different spaces, and there are some atheist, sacred spaces that are for sort of atheist worship, but there aren't that many. There are free thought societies, there's Sunday Assembly in London. And what I kind of came to in my thinking was the fact that a lot of us have these spaces in our lives, and it might be useful in some way to simply to recognize them, to sort of understand when you're in a space like that, how important it is to you, why it's important to support spaces like that. So in my life, the space that I was thinking of as a second home as a grown-up is my children's music school, where, that's like the first place I ever left them, unattended. I forgot them once or twice, and it was fine because there's other grown-ups who know them, it's a community. And then they also, they have this gorgeous recital space. So there's that part too, where you just feel like, we all are participating in valuing this kind of non-essential part of life that is a beautiful human creation, that is music. So my daughter actually has her final recital Saturday, and I'm a little freaked out. But
that's your youngest, right?
That's my youngest.
And so then you're kind of graduating out of the community.
Yeah. In theory, we're always a part of it, but practically I don't have, I already don't have to go anymore. She drives. So, you find your next one, is it going to be the library where you can go if you don't have internet? Is it going to be a movie theater that you persist in using, even though there's a multiplex at the mall? What are your spaces? How can you support those spaces? And make sure you have one in your life, because I do think they make your life bigger. Yeah.
We've talked a lot in our movement. The phrase I use is secular spirituality. I think another knock on atheists is that we're somehow missing some component of human emotion, which is of course absurd, but it's just that we label things differently, right? So we want to experience awe, right? It's just that it's a natural awe. And what you're describing, certainly like music can be spiritual for non-religious people. We just don't some folks in our movement won't use the word spiritual because it might imply that there's something in the ether that's entering our body. To me, it's just chemistry in my brain, but I seek it out. I want that feeling.
Yeah.
So that absolute, and folks, I live in Brooklyn. Folks may not know, we've got great beaches in Brooklyn. They're only usable a few months out of the year, but when I stand and look at the ocean, I get a feeling, and I want that feeling. And I think religious people experience that as a religious feeling. I just think it's like an awe and appreciation and so on, but it's very individualized. And the community piece that you're describing, as well as the music piece, is something that I think is very challenging nowadays, especially for folks who are not part of a religious community, to kind of find that. So, I really appreciate that. I want to make sure we leave time to get to any questions. So Katie, have you been following, and can you tell us, you want to pop on screen? You want to unmute?
Sorry about that. Took me a while. There haven't been any big questions. I think everyone is talking about how they feel in their own coming out or in their spiritual community. I actually am kind of curious about taking this into policy and how religious privilege impacts policy, both at the state and federal level, and what you both think about that.
There's so much going on right now. It lends a certain urgency to this, what otherwise could be a very personal question of how you want to live your life and how you want to speak to your children and things like that. I guess, for me right now, the fact that the state of Oklahoma just gave a public school charter to a religious school, St. Isidore Virtual Charter School, it is, it shouldn't be a wake-up call. We should have had many, many, many wake-up calls, but this is it. This is the erasure of the line between church and state. And we can't, I think we've all seen that we can't count on the Supreme Court to make the right call necessarily here, even though it's clearly unconstitutional at a federal level. It's clearly unconstitutional at Oklahoma level. It's against Oklahoma's law. Their actual charter law says you can't be sectarian. So beyond unconstitutionality, I think a concern that I have, that we should all have, is that religious organizations, because of what we've been talking about this whole time, because religion is the default in the United States and gets an outsized amount of a deference at the political level, religious institutions don't have to abide by a lot of the civil rights laws that everybody else has to abide by if they want to receive public funds, or even if they don't. There's some labor law, Americans with Disabilities Act. There's all kinds of laws that we've put in place to protect vulnerable people, but we've carved out exemptions for religious institutions. And so then, if we are now as taxpayers going to be funding those institutions, we're funding institutions that are above or beyond, shall we say, our own interests, our own laws. Yeah, it's a very scary time, I think.
Yes, it is. I'm kind of curious if you have some thoughts about religious privilege in the workplace. I think we see that all the time of holidays, and anything you want to add to talk about in that area.
I mean, what I've written about and what I know most about, I suppose, is again the sort of ability of people to not do their jobs based on their sincerely held religious belief that prescribing or, filling someone's contraception prescription is morally wrong, or that same-sex marriage is morally wrong. So I have sort of been focused on that aspect of the way in which somehow you're allowed not to do your job, which, if that's the way you feel about contraception, then don't be a pharmacist, or be willing to risk being fired. I feel like, again, we need to sort of flip it back again and say, if it really is this important to you, then go ahead, stand up for your beliefs. But that doesn't mean we all have to bend to them. So that's the aspect I've been focusing on. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, no, it's not just religious institutions, it's cake bakers too. I mean, the Supreme Court has extended that privilege to commercial institutions as well, Hobby Lobby, right? And this idea that corporations are people, like all of it is bending so far over backwards to accommodate religious belief. And the issue, and I think the civil rights piece that you bring up is the thing, which is this is a right to discriminate.
Right.
And it wouldn't be tolerated if it was against people of color, because we've gotten past that as a society. And so it just wouldn't be tolerated for a church to say, we can't ordain Black people, right? But they can certainly say, and they are protected by law to say, we're not going to ordain gay people.
Right.
And, the argument is, well, it's right here in our religion, but it used to be in your religion about Black people too, right? And humanistic values, I think, shaped religious values, even though maybe they don't want to say so, to reinterpret their religion, so that now that's so offensive to even think about that was part of the system, right?
Not that long ago.
Yeah. And in fact, we just celebrated Loving Day. Do folks know what Loving Day is? It's the celebration of the Supreme Court decision in 1967 that legalized interracial marriage in the United States across all states. It was legal in some states, illegal in other states. I have I think it's the easiest interracial marriage that there is, white man, Asian woman, but I am interracially married, and I'm, this is within my parents' lifetime, and like 6 months before my lifetime, when I wouldn't have felt legally protected in every state. And that's, it's hard to imagine. That's in most of our lifetime. So we've gotten past it. I do feel we will get past it for LGBTQ equality. When you look at poll numbers of younger people in this country, it's not even an issue. This is now a battle that's raging for older folks, like and religious folks skew older as well. So there is a tie-in to all of this. But in the meantime, the courts can do generational damage and cause real harm to real people. And then that's the bottom line. And that's why we want to advocate. And that's why I love your columns. And folks need to go read these if you haven't. And then we sent a couple actually in our email list when we promoted this talk, because the best thing about them, as far as I'm concerned, is the humor, right? I mean, you can't not take a step back and kind of point out some of the absurdities here in their approach. And it's very heavy when you think about the bigotry that people face in this country still. But sometimes you just have to step back and laugh. So that's one piece that I really also appreciate about all of your columns.
We had one question asking about being agnostic. I think kind of exploring the idea of differences between atheist, agnostic, of faith. So I'll just kind of open that up to discussion.
I do address that in my book because I thought it was funny when I first started to sort of force myself to tell people that I was an atheist, which really was difficult for me because of what Paul described earlier about how people, bristle. The reception was much better than I expected. People were mostly like polite and curious, but a lot of people were really hoping that I misspoke and I was actually an agnostic, because I think, people are much more comfortable with the idea of doubt than they are with the idea of sort of any kind of certainty around something that we all know can't exactly be proven. I just don't feel that way. I don't feel that there are, some arguments for the existence of God and some arguments for the non-existence of God. I kind of feel like all the evidence is on the side of this is a human creation, very, very smart, very durable human creation, and not a thing that exists in reality. So that's kind of where I come down on that. But yeah, people are still trying to puts me back over there.
I'm lucky enough to get to talk about it all the time because I can't describe my job and just leave it at humanistic Judaism because people don't know what that is. And I had mentioned the first part when I do say I'm atheist when it comes to the God of the Bible or any other God in religion. But I am agnostic when it comes to what else might be there in the universe. Because how can I know? I don't know, right? But I feel really strongly that whatever that is not interjecting into human affairs. That it's up to humans to make the world a better place. And frankly, and I mentioned at the top that there are a much higher rate of atheists among Jews, or certainly Jews who don't believe in the God of the Bible. And I think just knowing our history requires a rejection of a God who interferes in human affairs. Because, I mean, the mental gymnastics that I've read from some folks who still want to hang on to that about the Holocaust and why the Holocaust happened is so infuriating to me, quite frankly. I mean, to me, the only conclusion is that God is not interfering, or if he's interfering so selectively, then that's not who I need to pray to help, because he's clearly not paying attention. I lost dozens, like literally 24 family members on a family tree in the Holocaust. And, so anyway, that's my balance of atheist and agnostic. And I do find that it gives people an opening, because how can you say, we just don't know, right, about what else might be out there. Now, lately, there's been a whistleblower saying that we've been visited by aliens. I don't believe that, but maybe they'll come and they'll tell us. But I almost dread the day when we're visited by aliens and someone tries to explain to them about Jesus Christ, our Savior, and how we have to help their community understand that as well. Like Anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We will hopefully be able to continue this conversation with you, because when the book comes out, I think there's going to be just a groundswell of interest, and I think our individual congregations will also want to reach out to you and have you talk to their folks as well.
That would be just fantastic. This has been a real pleasure, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody. Even if you want to try and convert me, that's, go for it.
You're mostly there. I mean, look, the truth is that we don't have an active community in a lot of places. And so it's hard to do it all on Zoom. We've got a community in Rochester, and I know that just saying Rochester is offensive because I know how far that is from Albany. And I'm just being a typical New York City person in thinking
it's up there somewhere.
Yeah, you're all. I know. So I know it's not helpful. But we'll be in touch, and
Okay.
in the meantime, we're all going to continue to follow your work in the Washington Post as well.
Great. And can I ask you, it's just getting underway. I have to add a lot of stuff to it, but I have a new website. And if anybody wants to go to katecohen.net, net's the cool one, but that there's a place to fill out my, just put your email so that I can be in touch about things that are happening with the book. And that would be awesome. And then there's also links to some of my columns there. So katecohen.net.
Perfect.
Anyone's
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.